The goal for each podcast episode is for us to be honest, open, and transparent. While conversations do include mental health, this show does not replace support from a licensed mental health professional. If you feel triggered by any of these conversations, please feel free to take a break from the episode and check in with your support system.
Relationship resilience, from my perspective, comes in twofold. First fold is my relationship with myself. Now, that has been something that as I've gotten older, I've recognized is more and more important than the relationships I have with the people in my life, because I spend so much more time with myself than I spend with anybody else. The first thing I do when I wake up is I say hi to myself. Last thing I do before I fall asleep is I say goodnight to myself, right? I'm the first and last person that I see each day and talk to. And so when I think about, someone who has an experience that opens up and is vulnerable to somebody else and they don't feel like they're received in the way in which we expect to be received, naturally, it's okay to kind of recede back and be like, okay, I don't want to do that again. But the question for them, and I would ask you, is, does that person have the ability to meet you where you're trying to meet them if they haven't been through the same experiences as you?
Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health podcast. This is episode 44. I am your host, Abraham Scully, and you are tuned into the podcast for young adults and leaders in education who want to create a safe space for honest dialogue about mental health. And just like every other episode, we have a phenomenal guest, and I am sure you are going to benefit from this conversation. We're going to be talking about mental health, of course, but how do we specifically support students in creative ways? Because one thing that I find is that typically, because we are so used to traditional ways of doing things, our minds are closed off as it relates to how can we reach young adults with the era, the generation, and the way we do things now. And there are a lot of people who are against technology. There are a lot of people who are for technology. A lot of people recognize that we can utilize the advancements that we have in technology to reach young adults and to support them in very meaningful ways. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you all my guy, Keenan Hart. He goes by, well, at least for me, K Hart. What's going on, my guy?
How's it going, man? Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be a part of today's conversation, and being episode 44 holds a special place in my heart. So super pumped that I was able to kind of get slotted in for this. I'm pumped for today's, conversation.
I love it, man. And I appreciate you taking some time to dive in and share some value with our audience. So I'd love to actually start here because ever since I met you, so what's very interesting is we met through LinkedIn, but it wasn't a direct connection that I had. It was my wife who saw you post something a while ago. And she was like, yo, Abe, you got to connect with this guy. Whoever he is, he's doing something cool. And I want to say I connected with you or didn't. I don't remember sending the connection request, but it took some time for us to finally get connected on LinkedIn. And then when I did get connected, you had something in your bio that just struck me. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And how do I find out more? I remember sending you a message and saying just, hey, what is that thing? And tell me a little bit more. And we were able to jump on a Zoom call. So I had a chance to kind of connect with you. And since then, we've been able to have multiple conversations. And obviously, we know about, something that's going to be shared with the public very soon in regards to, partnering and things like that. But if you can just share a little bit about yourself, the work that you do currently, and then how you got into this work.
Absolutely. So my name is Keenan Hart. I am currently, at the time of this being recorded, a 32-year-old entrepreneur who's had a passion for entrepreneurship ever since I grew up. Now, I grew up in a biracial family. Dad is African-American, mom is white. And I saw the different ways in which we approached kind of business, but also culture as well. And so when I got out of college in 2013, I actually started looking at how am I going to find a way for me to provide for myself and my family, right? I wanted to be a business owner, an entrepreneur, just like my dad. And so back in 2014, we actually started a telehealth company. Now, telehealth, and it's interesting kind of how you started off today's episode when we talk about some people like technology, some people don't. I've always been somebody who's seen technology as a tool that should increase access to healthcare services or something that can serve us. And so back in 2013, 2014, me and my dad started a telehealth company, really to try and help people get access to mental and behavioral health services. And the biggest thing that we found was when you think of my home state of Nevada, people think of Las Vegas or they think of Reno in the north. But there are so many small populations of people who don't have access to mental and behavioral health services. And so one day, me and my dad were at a psychiatrist's office who's a family friend. Somebody walks through the front door and she says, you know, it took me 5 hours to be here or to get here today. I'm so sorry I'm late for my appointment. And of course, that opened up a conversation. And we asked, why did it take 5 hours for you to get here? Is this like something you do like every once in a while? She's like, no, I come down here every other week for my appointment with a psychiatrist. Why? Because I don't have access to a resource like this in my community. And so instantaneously, a light bulb kind of went off in my head. And I was thinking about, is there a way that technology can kind of fill some of the gaps? And just so happens at the time, there was a bill that was released in Nevada that said a healthcare provider, a psychiatrist, can have a virtual interaction with you, and it can be billed as if they were in the same office as you. And so me being born in 1990, I was like, dude, there's got to be a way for us to use video chat to be able to increase access to services like this, because I'm sure if this one individual has to travel so far to access these services, then other people have to as well. So from 2014 all the way into the pandemic, I was going out into the world talking about how technology can be the bridge, if you will, the connector between where people are and their providers wherever they're located. Now, I got to be honest with you. First couple of years were very challenging for me, Abe. Why? Because a lot of people didn't believe in telehealth as being something that patients would want to experience. They're like, nobody wants to talk to their doctor on video chat. Nobody wants to talk to their therapist. We want to be able to be in the same room. We need to be able to have that same experience, that engagement. And me being a little bit younger and kind of looking around at the world, I thought maybe that there was a different way that people wanted to access services. So fast forward to the pandemic, everybody becomes a telehealth company and the world starts to experience telehealth, something that I'm so incredibly passionate about. Now, one thing that I think about, which is a difference between telehealth and telemedicine, is telehealth is the use of all pieces of technology to increase access, engage with, and support patients through their care journey, right? Telemedicine in itself is just very transactional. There's a billable code associated with it, and we're going to be billing for that service. 15 minutes, $68, whatever that could be. So I've always been very passionate about using all the forms of technology to help support people. So as the pandemic was going on, I went out to my mental and behavioral health partners who we had, gotten to buy into the dream of telehealth and how impactful it could be to increase access to services and have counseling services or therapeutic, sessions with their individual clients. And I asked, what is the biggest problem you guys are still facing? And they're like, well, we have a really tough problem getting people to engage in their therapeutic process when they're not in front of their therapist or counselor. And that makes a lot of sense to me because I think about how distracting life is today. We do so much stuff that is outside of our therapeutic experience with our trusted healthcare provider or advisor, right? Our therapist or our counselor. And so recognizing that this was a problem, I started going back to the drawing board, Abe, and I was thinking, how can we help create more opportunities of support for people who are going through that mental and behavioral health care continuum? And I came across an amazing study, and I think I told you this the first time that we met. There was a study at the University of Washington, a program that was set up called Caring Contacts. Now, Caring Contacts was pioneered by a psychiatrist by the name of Jerome Motto. Now, Jerome Motto was deployed in World War II, and throughout his entire deployment, he had a pen pal who wrote him letters the entire time when he was deployed overseas. He'd pull into a new station, he gets a letter. Anonymous. Hey, Jerome, just want to let you know that I'm thinking about you and want to have you come back home safe. Pulls into another station, another letter. Now, Jerome comes back from the war safe, but unfortunately still dealt with so many of the traumatic experiences of battle, saw a lot of really bad stuff. Inspired by his lived experience, he went into a field of psychiatry, and he actually worked inside of an inpatient hospital, helping people deal with the feelings of suicide ideation. Now, he took his lived experience and his accounted ability to keep going and keep a positive mindset to those handwritten letters. So he said, nurses, I want you guys to start writing letters to all of the people who get discharged from this hospital. I want you to give them those little messages of encouragement and positivity that I got when I was deployed, because trust me, this is going to make a difference. Years later, they went back and looked at the death logs in the communities, and they found that not a single person who got one of those handwritten letters ended up dying by suicide. A real testament to how simple a message of positivity and encouragement can be to somebody who's going through a tough time. So flash forward to 2018, the University of Washington says, hey, Jerome, we love what you're doing with those handwritten letters. Why don't we turn those into text messages? And so when I came across this program at University of Washington, I was like, hey, we already, from a telehealth perspective, already use text messages to send out appointment reminders, confirmation, Zoom links, all the different stuff, education, PDFs, additional resources. What if we use our system to send out a randomized message of positivity, encouragement, support, or a mental wellness resource to the patients and clients of our mental and behavioral health organizations? Would that be valuable? So we went out into the world, presented this solution, and something very interesting happened. Now, when I went to those first couple leaders, those CEOs of those behavioral health organizations, they said, we totally buy into this idea of using these text messages to support and encourage our clients. But what about our therapists and counselors? These are the people who are showing up for other people every single day and pouring into their cups, but never giving themselves the chance to be able to fill their own. And so taking that experience, I started looking at all the other types of people who need encouragement, support. And it was kind of an eye-opening experience, because I started to find that everybody can use a message of encouragement, positivity, and support in their lives, or a mental wellness resource that maybe doesn't have the time to give themselves enough time to recharge or access traditional resources, like you talked about at the very beginning of the call today. And so that was kind of where Francis in itself was built, the use of simple technology to be able to meet people where they are with a message of encouragement or support that maybe they don't get from their community, their friends, or their family. And really, we've, just really enjoyed kind of being that positive impact on the people who we can reach.
I love it, man. You said so many impactful things and important things in that. And I love the story about the lady who came 5 hours to see her psychiatrist, because in fact, there are some people who say, well, if I have to drive or take 5 hours to get there, I'm not even going to go.
Right.
Right. I would much rather sit here and figure out another way to cope with what I'm dealing with, or another way to treat what it is that, whether it's the disability, the illness, whatever it is, in a way that is more convenient for me. So I think just thinking about, okay, if this is a barrier, how can we eliminate this barrier, is just a great place to be. I would love to know, though, because, and I love that you mentioned Francis, we're definitely going to dive into that. And I actually want to share today the message that I got from Francis in my, daily text that I'm privileged to receive.
Oh,
And
this
it
is
always puts
exciting.
me in a good space mentally. But I'd love for you to share, because these randomized text messages, they're almost like you have this friend who is checking in with you, and they're saying, hey, are you okay? And you know my story, because I had a chance to come on your podcast, but we've talked a few times already. And a part of my own mental health journey was that I had a friend who saw the signs that I wasn't having a good time, my life wasn't the best, and I was withdrawing and isolating. And she reached out and she said, hey, are you okay? And every time I get, every day when I get my Francis text, I'm like, man, that's like the friend, right, that I get to, that checks in with me, and I'm able to have that experience. But share with me an experience that you have, if any, when you were in that dark place, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and you felt like, man, I really need someone to check in, send me a text, see how I'm doing. And maybe you didn't get that, or maybe you did. I'd love to hear one of those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to start kind of with the inspiration for the friend. And I love how you kind of position that. So one thing about Francis is our logo is a purple gorilla. Now, you might be like, a purple gorilla doesn't make a lot of sense, but let me dive into my story. When I was born, my dad gave me a stuffed gorilla named Key, and it still sits on the shelf in my office today. He's literally looking at me as I do this interview. And it's crazy to think about when I was younger, especially a teenager, right? I was going through a lot of different changes. I was experiencing different stuff. I was getting into sports. I was coming across success and hardship. I didn't have a lot of friends that I felt comfortable talking to about the stress, the anxiety, I would say, the feelings of inadequacy that I had when I was playing sports and just like navigating the human experience. And so I would come home every single day and I would actually talk to Key, my little gorilla, because he's always been in my room. And so there were times when I'd find myself just like talking about like, I feel like I should be doing better, but I don't know what's going on. And I don't know why this girl doesn't like me, all the life experiences that we went through. And so when it came to having a safe space for me, that's really what that stuffed animal represented, was a friend that I could speak to, somebody who was accepting, somebody who was always there to listen, and somebody who was there for me to just bounce ideas off of. And so when we started thinking about creating the brand of Francis, I started not looking at inspiration from the world, but looking internally towards what were some of my life experiences and how could I share that with other people. And so when we came to developing Francis, we really wanted to hit on that emphasis of everybody needs a friend. But sometimes, because of the stigma of mental health, we don't want to talk to a Tyler or a Brandon or a Keenan, right? Or a Sarah or a Stephanie, because that's scary. But if everybody could have the same experience and having that person who's always willing to engage with them and always deliver that message of positivity and uplift them, then that would be amazing. But how do we do that? And so we started going out and looking at how do we personify our lived experience in something that we know will be impactful. And that's kind of where the logo of Francis came from. Now, I think that's a really cool story to share. The other part about Francis is me and my sister are also co-collaborators in creating Francis. So my first name is Franklin, Fran. I was named after my great-grandfather. And my sister is my sis, right? So if I take Fran and sis and smush them together, we get Francis. And, the logo of being my stuffed animal, Key, my little gorilla, and then purple is actually my mother's favorite color. And so you'll see a lot of the content that I put out there is always about purple. And so as I've gotten a little bit older, I just want to give other people the lived experience of support and encouragement that I've always had from my family, but also the experiences that we've shared together. And that's kind of where the inspiration came from.
I love that. And I think just listening to that story, I think anyone listening can resonate with being able to find support or safety in maybe an inanimate object, right? But that's where it starts. I'm thinking now, you mentioned you're 32.
Yep.
So you're 32 now.
Don't make fun of me.
Nah. How have you been able to develop and nurture a relationship with your quote unquote Key today at 32? Because one thing that I have conversations with and speaking to students all throughout the country is it's so important to be hot, right? And it's this acronym that I've developed. Anyone listening to this, you've heard it before if you're a frequent listener, being honest, being open, and being transparent. But that's difficult sometimes, right? It's difficult to be open with someone. It's difficult to know that I can open up and potentially be rejected. But it's also necessary to build these meaningful relationships. And so as I share this, principle or concept with students, they're like, that sounds good, but where do I start? Like, how can I even do that? And I have some thoughts around that, but I'd love to hear, you're 32 now, you've lived life, you've experienced life, and you probably had, great relationships and big breakups. But all throughout that journey, you have a core group, I'm certain, of people who, you can talk to, you feel safe to open up with. You don't have to wear the mask. You don't have to, do all these things. How do you develop that relationship with your quote unquote Key today?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. And it's never something that I really thought about before. But if I were to quantify it into simple terms, I would say at some point in time, we have to really think about what's really going to make us feel like we're in alignment with our true selves. I think sometimes in my life, I found myself maybe cheating myself by not being honest, being open, and being transparent about how I felt in certain situations. And so being able to surround myself with friends, trusted colleagues, mentors, and people that I can have that safe space with, not only is it a good exercise for myself, but it also kind of reshaped my world and gave me a better understanding that there were people around me who were going through similar experiences, and they often appreciated having honest conversations. And that's something that I never really experienced when I was younger because I always kind of maintained that mask, right? And I think in the world of social media today, it's so easy to try and put out an image of ourselves, our situation, how we feel, how we navigate hardship and, difficult times with an expectation that other people are going to be looking to us like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to be doing it. When the opposite for me has been true, when I found that when I'm honest, when I'm vulnerable about things, people connect with me because we're talking about seeing each other in our shared human experience, which is very unique. And that's something that I've started to really understand as I've gotten older. And really, it just comes back to that term that I use, the alignment with who I know I truly am. Being able to build those relationships that with people who actually connect with me for who I am, not the person who I try to be, are some of the most fulfilling relationships. And they make me feel the most like myself.
I love it. Such an amazing, profound answer. I think, the reality in developing these relationships, it's understanding, it's not always going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You may open up with that person and, they may be manipulative or they may not be the person you thought that they were. And you may not have that safety. And then at that point, it's like, it's already too late. Like I've already opened up, I've already shared, I've already become vulnerable. What do you say to that person who has experienced that and they're at the point where they're like, I'm not trying that again. Like that hurt too much. Like I'm not going to put myself in that position.
That's a really good question. And, when I was looking over some of the information that you sent over, this is something that caught my eye, which was relationship resilience. And relationship resilience, from my perspective, comes in twofold. First fold is my relationship with myself. Now, that has been something that as I've gotten older, I've recognized is more and more important than the relationships I have with the people in my life, because I spend so much more time with myself than I spend with anybody else. The first thing I do when I wake up is I say hi to myself. Last thing I do before I fall asleep is I say goodnight to myself, right? I'm the first and last person that I see each day and talk to. And so when I think about, someone who has an experience that opens up and is vulnerable to somebody else and they don't feel like they're received in the way in which we expect to be received, naturally, it's okay to kind of recede back and be like, okay, I don't want to do that again. But the question for them, and I would ask you is, does that person have the ability to meet you where you're trying to meet them if they haven't been through the same experiences as you? There was a saying that really caught my eye a couple of years ago, and it was like, other people can only love you as much as they love themselves. And I've always thought about, for my friend group, for the people who I work with on a daily basis and the people I impact just by being around them, I want to be somebody who can lead by example. And sometimes leading by example, in my honest opinion, is putting ourselves in situations where it's going to be kind of scary. And sometimes we're going to have our expectations let down because people don't meet us where we need to. But my question is that a me issue or is that a them issue? Right. So the first fold that I talked about, relationship with myself. And the secondary part is other people are only going to be able to meet you as far as you're able to meet yourself. And so if you're willing to be vulnerable, be honest, and talk about tough conversations, you'd be surprised about how quickly people might turn that corner after having that first, like, hey, I didn't want to talk about that, but like now I think I'm ready. You were very inspirational. And you kind of, showed me that I need to talk about this stuff as well. So I hope I answered that question. Okay.
100%. I love that because it is twofold. It starts with you and then it goes out. And I think, just to add to everything you just said, it's for the person who's in that position, it's like recognizing I deserve to have that relationship where I can, have that safety and I can, and it can be reciprocated. Like I deserve that. So for me to quit and not even continue to pursue what that could be for my life is really putting myself at a detriment because I don't realize who I am and what I truly deserve as a human being. And I think, all of us, we desire, but we also need connection. We need human connection. And that's just at a bare minimum, in terms of our survival and ability to thrive. But having those relationships with people where you can drop the mask, it only accelerates, your ability to do anything, right? It's an amazing thing. So I talked about Francis, and I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about, share with us like some of the responses that you've heard from, users, like people who are able to get this text daily, or even the institutions who have rolled it out, for their clients or students or staff. But before you dive into that, the message I got today was actually at 7:27 a.m. And it said, "The world is filled with kindness. Seek it out and you will repeatedly find it." How can you find kindness around you today? And just imagine waking up to that text message, right? Anyone who is able to say, like, look at your phone, because more times than not, if we're honest with ourselves, one of the first screens we look at is our cell phones when we wake up. So imagine
Yep.
being able to look at our cell phones, and that's the message. That's a question of the day, pretty much. How can I find kindness today? My brain is immediately now looking for answers to that question, because that's just how our brains work, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing to start the day on that foot, rather than what are all the things that I don't have? What didn't I get done yesterday that I need to do? Like, where am I lacking? So it's been super helpful for me to just receive these text messages, because there are moments during my day where I'm like, I don't feel the greatest,
Mhm.
or things could be better, or I may not be focusing on gratitude. And then I get a text that says, "Hey, repeat after me. I can do this. Take a deep breath and repeat." It's like, whoa, all right now. So I love it. But share with everyone listening, what are some of the things that you've been hearing from users in terms of things that make you feel like, wow, I'm really making an impact with this technology that we've developed?
Oh man. So I'm gonna share a story to start about a lady named Stephanie. So my sister has a friend via her new fiance named Stephanie, who's a 29-year-old girl who lives in California, right? She, in the last year, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer at 29 years old, right? And so she had been going through some really tough times. She was very down and she wasn't very confident in her experience and really was kind of shaken through just the experience of not being healthy. You know what I mean? Like, I've had some major injuries in life, and the only way that I can kind of relate to that experience is sometimes you feel like maybe your body lets you down, and it creates a little bit of instability for us, psychologically. So Stephanie was going through her experience of going through chemo, and unfortunately she got really sick during her chemotherapy. And she, on a testimonial, sent a video over to us and was like, it's crazy when you're too sick to be treated for being sick. And on one of the days when she was feeling really down, and this kind of makes me emotional, she got a text from Francis that said, "Just appreciate everything that you have overcome to get to this point. Stay confident in your process and recognize that you can do this." And she internalized that by being like, I have to give my body the gratitude and the acceptance for everything that it's been through thus far. And the little reminder to keep going was a boost of encouragement that she needed to feel confident in her therapeutic process. So that's just one message from one person that kind of makes me supercharged, because we never know how someone is going to be met in the moment with their message. So the fact that you woke up to that message today was very interesting. I actually received a message from Francis today that said, "Everything will fall into place for you. It always does." And let me give you a little brief of my morning. I had 4 meetings cancel for me today because it's Friday, right? And everybody was like, "Hey, I'm so sorry. We're just so busy. I got to reschedule for you, blah, blah, blah." And I started to get a little bit discouraged, honestly. And the second half of the message says, "Some days it seems like the winds are against us, while others it is at our back. Trust the process of the bigger plan. Your story is bigger than the page that you are currently on." And so, me internalizing that, I was like, okay, sometimes as an entrepreneur, I get so focused on what's happening right now that I lose the forest for the tree that's right in front of me. And so, giving myself kind of the opportunity to like reframe and kind of sit back and be like, what, this is just one page of my chapter, which is a part of a larger book, gives me the appreciation to kind of sit back and, be more present for the ride. But that was how that met me today, with a simple text. But one of the things that we hear the most, and this is very interesting because of both of our, family cultures, we find that a lot of Francis subscribers from a large organizational perspective are healthcare workers, they're employees, they're manufacturers, they're construction workers. These are people who are so busy during the daytime that often they don't give themselves enough time to recharge or access traditional resources like we talked about. And some of the feedback that we've gotten has been phenomenal from these people who say, I don't need that type of support. And I put that in, air quotes, because so many of us feel like we don't need a boost of encouragement. We don't need to be uplifted. We don't need a little reframe that can help us think differently. But once people start experiencing Francis and a message meets you in the world and gives you that opportunity to start a conversation with yourself, like, how does this apply to me? The reactions that we've been getting from people have been phenomenal. We've got nurses who are like, I never thought that I would ever, work on myself throughout the day because I don't have time. But when I receive that message and it's positive and it's uplifting, it kind of resets me. I've heard from construction workers, like, I never thought I'd be the type of guy who wanted to get a text message from a purple gorilla. But now every single day when I get it, I look forward to it because I know it's going to be something that's going to help me think healthier thoughts. So we get so much feedback like that. And, one of the biggest things I think about from a technological perspective is I get so worried about how much time we spend on our mobile devices, our cell phones today, because we're almost fed so much negativity through them. Rarely do we ever have someone who taps you on the shoulder and is like, hey, I just want to let you know that everything's going to be okay. And then they just vanish, right? I don't have that friend often. I don't have those parents because that's not our relationship. But I do have somebody who can be with me on a daily basis who's always going to be that interruption of positivity that I can value from or that I can benefit from.
I love that. That's so good. And it's so relatable because how many people, especially, entrepreneurs who feel like I don't need motivation. I mean, what I do is motivation enough. But what benefit can you gain if you are able to just get another booster with all the motivation you already have? So I love that you're hearing those responses. So this podcast is called Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health. So I would be doing a disservice to our listeners if we didn't talk about, some of the lies, some of the misconceptions that we hold around mental health and mental illness. And, especially with the background you come from. You said you have a Black father, white mother, correct?
Yep.
So I don't know the types of conversations around mental health that you had growing up, but I'm curious to know, as it relates to some of that stigma and shame that we hold around mental health, what are some of the things that maybe you have experienced around stigma and shame you currently experience, or some of the things that you hear in your inner circles around mental health?
So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of my lived experience with stigma. So growing up in a biracial family, I was really able as a young child to see some of, I guess, subconsciously the behavior and the position in which we positioned mental health and conversations around it. So I've had family members on both sides of my family struggle with anxiety, depression, substance use disorder issues. But the way in which they were positioned was Uncle Terry on my Black side of my family, that's just the way he is. And he's always been like that. And we're just like, let him just do his thing. He's fine. Don't worry about it. He's screaming and like being upset and he's crying at family dinners and barbecues, but that's just how he is. He's emotional. The other side of my family would be like, hey, I think something's wrong with your aunt. And so she's going to go talk to a doctor or talk to a therapist about how she can get on medication, how she can start, experiencing the change that she's looking for because it's having a negative effect on our family. And so as I grew up, that was a very interesting experience by seeing some of the cultural normatives that come along with raising our hand for help because of the stigma that we have internally in our culture or maybe our family. And I really worry about the multitude of people who are out there who experience issues, who experience feelings of self-doubt, who are depressed but don't know how to bring it up, or maybe their family members just don't have the skill set to be able to have educated conversations about what this kind of stuff means. And so that's been a huge experience for me. And that's something, now that I'm older and I kind of unpack some of my family experiences being in younger, I really noticed some of the challenges that we faced, but we often, like so many people, kind of turn the eye or turn the cheek and kind of looked in the other direction and was like, okay, well, let's just get over here, kids. Right? Now, from a personal stigma perspective, I grew up an athlete. So one thing that your listeners won't be able to tell by the way I talk is I'm 6'6", 235, 240 pounds. I'm a big dude. I played athletics at all three sports, baseball, football, basketball, always played at really high levels. And when I look back on my athletic career, I played with some incredibly successful and talented individuals, but we didn't know that each other were silently suffering from feelings of anxiety, feelings of performance anxiety, feelings of inadequacy when we didn't get a start in the games, right? And it's very interesting that we had some of the most amazing men in our lives were these leaders, our coaches, people who taught us fundamental life lessons about teamwork, about respect, about accountability, about consistency, about hard work. But we never had the conversations around the mental aspect of supporting each other. It was always be a good teammate, pick your teammate up when they've got their chin down. It was never, you should talk to your teammates about maybe how they're feeling and be that brother that somebody could lean on in some of those situations. And so that's just very interesting to me, that's kind of my lived experience. I know that if you were an athlete, you also probably never had those conversations with your coaches either. And now that we get out into the big old world and we're 32 years old, for some of us who are on the other side of 30, I think about the experiences and the conversations I have with my friends today. And it's more common than not. I wish I would have been able to. I wish we would have done. It would have been awesome if, right? And it kind of inspires me, not because of the time that we missed together and the conversations that we should have had, but more importantly, the conversations that we can start today by having conversations like this, you and I, by putting out stuff on social media and creating a safe space for other people to at least start the conversation, right? One thing I really believe about Francis is it creates opportunities for the conversation. If anything else, you and I can connect about the message that you got today. We can connect about the message that I got today. And then you instantly start thinking about how would that apply to me? And from my perspective, that's where it all starts, is with the conversation, right?
Yeah, that's so cool, man. And it makes me think about some of the educators and leaders in higher ed and schools that listen to this podcast. And we talk a lot about like changing the culture, right? Developing a culture of care. Like it really has a lot to do with the top down approach of having a community where we're having these conversations on a consistent basis and it's normalized, right? And I just think about, imagine what this does for an institution at large when every single student on campus is getting access to these text messages, these positive uplifting messages where a faculty member, before starting their class, hey, who would like to share what your Francis message was before we start class? Or friends seeing each other in the hall, and then it's an icebreaker, right? What was your message today? And it's really cool. And these are some of the things that Francis is doing, and they are, you guys are allowing opportunities and creating opportunities for conversation in this way, which is really cool. And I'm very grateful for. You talked about stigma. You talked about your personal experience and some of the things you saw growing up. How do we eradicate the stigma that exists?
This podcast is powered by Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence. Did you know that students who experience shame and hold negative perceptions about mental health conditions are less likely to reach out for help? By marrying the art of storytelling with mental health education, Speaks to Inspire is creating safe spaces through comprehensive, high-impact programs that help colleges, universities, and schools increase engagement and retention. Learn how you can bring a Speaks to Inspire speaker to your campus by visiting www.speakstoinspire.com/speakers.
I think it's consistency. You know what I mean? Like consistency is the only way that we're going to get out of this. The one thing that I worry about because of our culture today is we're very much like, let me put in a little bit of work and I hope I get an exponential return. Everybody's looking to hit the lotto, right? But systemic changes don't happen overnight. They take time. And so when you talk about the conversations aspect of Francis, that's a lot of things that we hear from different leaders of organizations, coaches who will, gift this to athletes. They'll be like, the conversation around mental health still is stigmatized because there's a preconceived notion with mental health, right? We all carry our own pack of understanding into the circle to be able to unleash and be like, oh, mental health means that you're sick. Mental health means that you have bipolar disorder. Mental health means that you've got other issues that we've all seen stigmatized by the media for years and years. But what happens if I'm just feeling a little bit sad? What happens if I'm just dealing with a transition in my life? Am I one of those people? And so when we talk about starting conversations, like you said, being able to have a lower barrier conversation about like, hey, what kind of Francis message did you get today? Is an incredible start to that. And it's also not overbearing. So the thing that we talk about is you receive one text message a day. And the thing about the one text message is it's going to come every single day, but you don't know when it's going to come, but it is going to come consistently. And there's amazing data out there that talks about the effectiveness of being able to form new neural pathways in our brain associated with positive stimulus. If you've got tiny little stimuluses in your life every single day, someone's telling you, you're the man, you can do this, be confident, it's going to be okay, we're going to get through this, rather than you're terrible, you're never going to succeed. You know what I mean? If you just like kind of put it in that language perspective, naturally our brains are going to start to adapt what we're being fed. And so I always talk about our mental diet. We need a little bit more positivity in our diet, a little bit more encouragement, a little bit more support that gets into our brain on a daily basis that we're not going to get from social media, from Instagram, from TikTok, from the news, from, you know, all the news that's been out there over the last couple of years. I rarely see the positive stories. They never meet me where I'm at. And so that's very interesting to kind of talk about as well.
I agree so much. And I got one more question, and I definitely want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners. Like, we've been talking about this text message. We've been talking about this whole technology thing, this whole, you know, purple gorilla. I want some of this, right? So I want you to share with the listeners like a little bit as to how they can take advantage of this. And at the time of our record, or when this releases, we would have in terms of publicizing our partnership with Francis. So it will be out there, and I'm sure there are opportunities for listeners to this podcast to be able to get some sort of, you know, gift, some sort of discount, maybe something like that when they listen to this. But my final question is, before you dive into how they can access, you know, Francis as well, what is mental health to you?
That's a great question. Mental health to me is a process. It is a daily clocking in. It is a daily clocking out. And it is recognizing that mental health, just like physical fitness for me, is very different from what Abe's definition might be, right? I think mental health in itself is a unique process of understanding what is going to be fulfilling for us, what is going to be supportive for us, what is going to give us the opportunity and safe place to be able to grow. You know, growing up an athlete, I recognize that the consistency of showing up and putting in work every single day might not be seen in the moment, but on the biggest stage, it all comes to fruition. And so when I think about mental health, it is a process. It is a unique experience for each one of us. And more importantly, it's a sense of self-awareness that I think we really need to start understanding more about ourselves, the way certain situations make us feel, the way certain emotions impact our life, the certain relationships that we talked about a little bit earlier impact our life as well. Mental health in itself is a dynamic definition for each of us. And in that itself, it becomes incredibly powerful because I think we try and get everybody to fit inside of this one box, right? Like, what is being in shape? For being in shape for some people might be running. Being in shape for some people might be lifting. Being in shape might be able to go for a walk, or maybe being able to stretch and not have that stiffness in your body. It's a different definition for all of us. And when you achieve that for yourself, you really start to, you know, settle into your groove and become the best version of yourself.
That's so good. That's so good. Well said. So dive into, with our listeners, how can they learn more about Francis? Maybe you might have a gift for those listening to the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health podcast. And then also, I'd love for you to share one thing that listeners can take away, one opportunity, one challenge, one request before we wrap it up.
I love this. So let's talk about Francis first of all. You can find more information about Francis and learn kind of learn about our mission and our unique experience and our approach to mental wellness and mental health at our website, which is Francis, FRANSIS.us. You can also find us on all the social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff at From Francis, like you're receiving a message from Francis. And then the one thing I would like to be able to extend to your audience is, because we are always looking to give everybody that little boost of encouragement and positivity. Everybody who's a listener to this podcast will be able to come to the website and sign up for a free 30-day subscription to Francis. So at no charge, no credit card, no nothing, allow us to be that boost of positivity and encouragement that you can use in your daily life, and just kind of give yourself the opportunity to start that conversation with yourself. I think that's super important. And the last thing is, my challenge for all the listeners today is, this is going to be something that is going to take less than 10 seconds. I want you to think about someone who you haven't spoken to in a long time, somebody who's in your contact list in your phone. And I want you to go through that contact list. And I want you to send somebody a text message and say, hey, I was thinking about you. I hope everything is good with you. And I just want you to let you know that I'm thinking about you. And watch what happens when you send out that message. Odds are somebody's going to come back and say, hey, I needed to hear this today. I really appreciate it. So be that positive light that other people need, and be that sense of support that other people are looking for, but maybe can't find.
Love it. And as they are listening, they're probably like, who is the guy behind the mission, the guy behind the brand? They might want to connect with you. What's the best place that they can go to find K Hart?
There you go. You can find me on LinkedIn. Everybody who's in that professional network, everybody, I guess, who's 30 plus years old, you can find me at Keenan Hart, KEENANHART, or you can find me on all the social platforms at Keenan, KEENANHEART, with a nice little heart at the end. So you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all that kind of stuff under Keenan Hart, one word, with an EART.
Love it. And you won't regret it. I'm following Keenan, and he's always posting positive, valuable, motivational content, and I'm sure you'll find value in it as well. As we wrap it up, as I normally do, I want to share some final resources with you all for our staff, educators, parents, all of you who support our students. We have our 14 ways to support students' mental health guide. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is go to the link in the bio and you can download that immediately, as well as resources. So we talk about national resources, local resources. For those of you who don't know, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is now 988. So anyone can call, anyone can text 988 and get immediate support from a crisis counselor for free. I'm talking about 24/7. If at 3 a.m. you need someone to talk to, you didn't get your Francis text yet, and your friend is asleep, and you need to really talk to someone, whether you're in crisis or not, you can text 988, you can call 988, and you can get that support. Also, we have a blog. If you are not aware, mental health education in schools is important. That's our most recent blog. You can go to speaks2inspire.com/blog. That's SPEAKS, the number 2, INSPIRE.com/blog. And then the same URL /resources for our national resources, additional blogs, how you can find and share this podcast as well. And last but not least, if you are not in our Facebook community, you got to join the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health Facebook group. All you got to do, if you're on Facebook, I know Keenan talked about the 30-year-olds and whatnot. So we know y'all 30-year-olds, y'all are on Facebook. I already know it. So if you're on Facebook, let's continue the conversation in the Facebook group, where we have tons of mental health advocates and those who are passionate about the mission of unlearning these lies and reshaping the way we think about mental health and mental illness. So go to Facebook and just type in Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, and you'll find the Facebook group. As soon as you send an invite or whatever, I will let you in personally and I welcome you to the group. So join us over there. Let's continue the conversation. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you take care.